Hello and welcome to another episode of Building Stuff Rocks. This is episode 7, and in the last episode we created a Gulp task that will convert our Markdown files, which contain our tutorials, tools, resources and fields, into JSON files, so we can use these files basically as our server. And that is because I wanted to put content on the website without actually having to implement the server yet. And the whole purpose of the Markdown conversion is so that I can write content in a proper file without having to edit JSON files. So all these Markdown files will be written to a tutorials.json file, and as you can see, this is the body string of our Markdown files. And you can't imagine this would be very painful to edit the content in here. And what's also nice is that the body content is converted into HTML. So I don't have to write HTML, I can write Markdown and it will be converted automatically. So I thought this little setup would be like a very good first tutorial on the website. And I don't know, I will call it like static JSON server or something. And the tool would be Node.js and the resources would be like the Node modules. Like, where is the Gulp file? Here it is. Like Gulp Markdown to JSON and Gulp JSON transform. And as a field, I think I'm going to just create a new field called JS for JavaScript. And yeah, this is the basic idea, to write a step-by-step tutorial how I convert the Markdown files to a JSON file and then use it as a server. Alright, I've created a new field MD file with the name JS and the ID of 2, and everything worked as expected. We now have a new field, but I'd rather want them to be displayed like in a grid side by side and not in a list, so I'm gonna fix this real quick. Okay, now as you can see, I have managed to arrange the fields in a bootstrap grid. So as you can see, it works very nicely. On a small device, they will be stacked on top of each other, and if the device gets bigger, then they will be 2 side by side or 3 side by side or then 4 side by side. And if I had a larger screen, then there would be up to 6 side by side. And I want to show you the code. I have wrapped every field in a div with the class row, and every field is wrapped in a bootstrap column by adding the column classes. And the class that is always here is called XS12, which means that on a device that is at least extra small, so like a phone, the grid is divided by 12, so 12 divided by 12 is 1, so you get 1 column. So when I go back to the page and make it a small device, then you can see that the fields stack up on each other because we just have 1 column. And then I said when the field length is greater than 1, then add the class column sm6. That means on a small device, divide the grid by 6, so 12 divided by 6 is 2, so you get 2 columns. And this happens when I'm resizing the browser window, that now we have 2 columns on a small device. And when the length is greater than 2, then we add column md4, so 12 divided by 4 is 3 columns. And when the length is greater than 3, then we have 12 divided by 3 is 4 columns, and when the length is greater than 5, then we have 12 divided by 2 is 6 columns. So this is what it looks like on a large device. I have 4 columns, and if I were to remove 2 fields, then we will see that we should have 3 columns. Yeah, so with 3 fields, these 2 classes are not added, so that means I'm saying use 3 columns on at least a medium device. And I'm not saying anything about greater devices, so it will use 3 columns from here on. And if I remove the 3rd field, then we will have 2 columns. Yeah, so the Bootstrap grid system is actually very neat if you know how to use it. So now I will rename this to demo or something, and then start adding some tutorial to our JS field. I have created the first tutorial by the name of Static Content Server. And the description is: this tutorial describes how to create JSON files from content stored in Markdown files that can be served from a static server. It can be used, for example, to simulate a content API for an Angular 2 project. The first step is to create content in Markdown. I have changed things a little bit. So the Markdown file name is just the content ID. The second step is to set up Gulp with 3 Gulp tasks: clean, Markdown, and server. And step 3 is the clean task. Step 4 is the Markdown task. Step 5 is the server task. And step 6 is the result, which gives us a JSON file. And in the post-processing step, which is the server task, I have changed things a little bit. So because now the Markdown file is just the ID, I'm adding the ID to the object and then returning the object. So that means that if you look at the Markdown files, you don't need to add the ID because the ID is here in the file name, and then it will get added to the object when post-processing the JSON file. So yeah, this is the first tutorial, and as you can see, I have not added any tools and resources. And this is because I think we might have a little problem. I have written down what we used for this tutorial. We have used the languages JavaScript and Markdown. We are using the runtime Node.js, and we are using the Node modules del, Gulp, Gulp JSON transform, Gulp Markdown to JSON, and Gulp util. And I was thinking about what is a resource and what is a tool, and finally came to the conclusion that resources and tools are far too limited. So we will need another solution for this. So what I thought, that these things here are building blocks, or I don't know, like things. And they are grouped together, for example, in languages or in runtimes or node modules. So we maybe need to create 2 new entities, like, I don't know, building block or thing, and then group of things instead of just tools and resources. And then we can assign these groups to a specific field. And maybe we should call this programming languages. So to the field JavaScript, we would assign programming languages, runtimes, and node modules. And then you can decide for your tutorial what kind of programming languages do you need, what kind of runtime do you need, and what node modules do you need. So this would be much more open than just tools and resources, which maybe work for some kind of fields, but they are way too restricted. Yeah, so I think this is the way to go, but before I want to show you what I've changed until now. So if we look at the div, I have changed the heading of a tutorial from H2 to H1. I have renamed some field to demo field. I have also added code highlighting to Markdown, so the code is highlighted here like this. And I have added the highlight.js style sheet. So the highlight.js node module, of course, just adds these classes to the HTML, and then we of course need a CSS file that actually colors these classes. So I've added highlight.js to the package.json and also added some style for the pre-tag, because in Bootstrap 4 it doesn't have a background color or a padding, so I've added that so it looks nice and pretty. Yeah, so let's commit this. Okay, and now I'm going to remove the tool and the resource entity, and I'm going to add, I don't know, maybe a thing entity. I've never called anything a thing in a program, so I don't know, maybe a building block, and then we need these groups or maybe categories, I don't know. I'm going to think about it and I'll see you in a bit. But before doing that, I've renamed all the Markdown files to 12123, so I've put the ID in the file name, and I have removed the ID from the files itself, and of course added changed the code that transforms the JavaScript files so the ID is written into the object. Okay, it is done. I have added the programming languages, the runtimes, and the node modules to the tutorial. And I was really struggling with the name of these things, because what do you call programming languages, runtimes, and node modules? I mean, this can be anything. So I really thought to name it things and group of things. And then I really liked the name ingredient, but I mean, yeah, these could be ingredients like languages, runtimes, or node modules. But what if you have like tools like a hammer? A hammer is not an ingredient, it's a tool. And then I thought about components, but that would clash with Angular 2 components. And again, a hammer is not a component. And then I was like requirements, but that really sounds very formal. And yeah, I went with a, let's say, computer scientific name. So these are items and these are item sets. So yeah, maybe sometimes the solution is no solution, or in our case to use simple programming terms. So I have replaced everything what was resources and tools with items and item sets. And basically everything stayed the same except for the item list component, which was the tool list component or the resource list component. And the main difference is that now I'm iterating through a list of item sets which contain items. But I still only have an item service and an item set service that gives me items or item sets for a list of IDs. And in the component, I'm creating this list of lists that can be iterated through in the template. So you can see in the spec file how this array looks like. So in this array, we have two objects and each object has an item set. In this case, there is still a remaining bit of my renaming action, because in the first step I had called them elements and element types. So I had something to work with, but then I renamed the elements to items and the element types to item sets. And this should be item set. Or I have to rename all of them. Okay, and let's check if the tests still work. Okay, and I actually should call this item set like this. Okay, now, so we have two objects and each object has an item set and a list of items. And I'm giving this to the template file so they can be displayed like this. And what I'm basically doing is first of all, every tutorial has all the item IDs stored in the item ID array. And then I'm fetching the items from the item service and rearranging them by type. And then for refactoring is so... Okay, this should actually be called items by set ID. Well, anyway, so I'm grouping these items by set ID and then I'm calling the item set service to give me all the item set objects. And then I'm creating this object called grouped items. Well, this array called grouped items and adding all these objects with item set and items. Yeah, and in the template I have two ngFors and the item set is displayed in a heading and all the items is like a list of labels. And yeah, I also thought to name these things labels, but yeah, a label is a very loose term, which I don't know, implies that you can add anything you want to these groups. But for example, the node modules is like a fixed set of items. And yeah, anyway, these are called items and item sets. So yeah, I'm going to look for anything that has the word type in it. Oh yeah, when I replaced the word element with item, then it also replaced it in here. This is lorem ipsum code, or rather text, and it replaced elementum to itemum. But yeah, it is all done now and I'm quite happy. I mean, it looks very good. You can see right at the beginning what kind of languages you need or node modules you need, and yeah, it could look a little bit nicer. I mean, this is plain Bootstrap, but I think it looks okay, and at some point I want to do a nicer design. But yeah, I'm really happy with it right now. So I guess this is it for this episode and see you next time.